Well, I want to welcome you to this new class from Dreamer to Dungeon to Dynasty over the life of Joseph. If you are from Prestoncrest, I had the privilege of teaching this class in person back in November and December for the Paysetters class. I'm currently teaching this class on Sunday mornings for the Discover Young Adults and Singles Ministry at Preston Place in Suite 135. But Robert Stolte asked me to film this series for our continuing adult education virtually through our church YouTube channel. And if you are tuning in today and you're not a member of Prestoncrest, we hope that you find some content on this YouTube channel that will greatly bless your life. I'm excited to study the life of Joseph with you. I love Joseph. Most people love the life of Joseph. In fact, one biblical author, commentator, made this statement about Joseph's life. He said that no star shines as brightly in the Genesis sky as that of Joseph. Don't you love that imagery? That no star shines as brightly in the Genesis sky as Joseph. If you think about what it's like to lay down in the backyard on a cool summer night and look up into the sky and see all of the stars, some stars really grab your attention more than others. And I think we understand what this writer is saying, that when we study the book of Genesis, Joseph really just grabs our attention more than some of the other characters. Now, the book of Genesis is a long book. It's 50 chapters in length. It covers about 2,200 years of biblical history. And if you think about the world existing for 6,000 years, the Christian idea, well, the book of Genesis covers a third of that time period as well. But Joseph, he's toward the end of the book of Genesis. Genesis chapters 37 through 50. His life covers 14 chapters. And that makes up roughly 26% of the book of Genesis. And so Joseph owns a large piece of real estate in the Genesis landscape of history. The struggles of faith that are seen in the lives of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, they are noticeably absent from the life of Joseph. But Joseph has his own struggles, which set him apart from any other character in the book of Genesis, and really they set him apart from most people throughout history. And so today I invite you to open your Bibles to Genesis 37. That's where we are first introduced to Joseph in the Genesis narrative. And there's some things that we could spend a lot of time talking about from Genesis 37. The first one being Joseph's famous coat of many colors. In fact, that's how most people remember Joseph in the Bible, even if they aren't Christians. They remember this story about this young man who was the favorite child who received this brightly colored coat from his father named Jacob. For years, we've referred to it as the coat of many colors. No one knows exactly what the coat would have looked like. The NIV refers to it as a richly ornamented robe in Genesis chapter 37, verse 3. That same Hebrew word is found in 2 Samuel chapter 13, verse 18 to describe the clothing of a princess. Was this something that women often wore? Was it something that only Joseph wore? Was it more of a coat? Was it more of a robe? Was it more like a dress? Well, no one knows for sure. This we do know. It was not worn by someone who spent a lot of time working out in the fields by the sweat of their brow. It wasn't common attire for someone who spent a lot of time doing hard labor, hard work. And that's one of the reasons why Joseph's brothers disliked Joseph so much. As you read through Genesis, it's pretty obvious that Joseph, he gets the easier end of the deal when he's living at home with his older brothers and with Jacob, his father. And from what we can tell, Joseph never missed an opportunity to wear this coat of many colors. We could spend some time talking about Joseph's dreams. That's kind of how he is known in history, as this wild dreamer and one who could also interpret other people's dreams. And when Joseph is first introduced to us in Genesis 37, he is a 17-year-old cocky teenager. And he has two dreams in Genesis 37. The first dream is his older brothers bowing down to him, and then the next dream is taken up one level. It's not just the brothers bowing down to Joseph, but also his father and his mother. And if you want to make friends with people who don't really like you already, you probably shouldn't tell them about how one day they will bow down and give you the praise. But that's what Joseph does early on in his life. We could talk about the hate that Joseph's brothers harbored for Joseph. In our world today, we use that word hate pretty loosely. It means to strongly dislike something or someone. Someone might say, I hate cottage cheese. Well, you don't hate cottage cheese. You would never choose cottage cheese. You may not like the taste of cottage cheese, but you have no reason to hate something that has no value whatsoever, no emotions, no feelings. But in Joseph's world, if you said that you hated someone, it was more than displeasure or dislike. If you hated someone in the ancient world and you used that word hate, it meant that you wanted to kill them. And you didn't just have the desire to end their life, you were actually taking some steps to make that a reality. Think about the story of Cain and Abel. The scripture says that Cain hated his brother Abel. So what did Cain do? Well, he killed Abel. Joseph's brothers hated Joseph. And so they devised a plan in Genesis 37 to kill Joseph. And that makes sense when we get over to the New Testament, because Jesus will compare hate with murder. He does it in the Sermon on the Mount. You remember he says, you've heard it said that you shall not commit murder, but I tell you that if you hate your brother, you have already committed murder in your heart. And John, when he writes his 3 little epistles toward the end of the New Testament, John would say the same thing, 1 John chapter 3, verse 15, that if we hate our brothers, that we are murderers. Well, Joseph's brothers hate Joseph, and they are planning to kill Joseph. We could spend some time talking about the cistern that they throw Joseph into in verse 24 when Reuben, the older brother, stops the murder. Your Bible may call it a pit. Archaeologists have studied cisterns in the ancient Near East. In the spring and in the fall, they would be full of water from the seasonal rains. In the summertime, they were empty. Well, the Bible tells us that the brothers throw Joseph into an empty pit, an empty cistern. So that kind of gives us a clue what time of year it was. It was summertime. It was hot. It was dry. It was very serious conditions for someone who was going to spend a lot of time outside with no food or with no water. And these archaeologists also tell us that these cisterns, these pits, would have been anywhere from 8 to 24 feet deep. If you're thrown into one of those pits, if you fall into one of those pits, you're not getting out on your own without someone to help you. So it's an interesting compromise that the brothers agree to make with Reuben. Okay, we won't murder him, but we'll throw him into this pit where he's probably going to die anyway from the terrible conditions of the outside world. In fact, the Bible even tells us in verse 25 that they sit down next to the pit to eat their meal. And they can hear Joseph crying for help. Joseph's not a young boy, but he's still only 17. He's not yet a man. And can you imagine hating your own brother so much that you can listen to his cries for help, and you know that he will probably die in the place that he is crying out from, and you can just sit there and continue to eat your lunch and not even care? Well, you know the story. While they're eating, they look up and the slave train comes along, the Ishmaelites, and they agree to sell Joseph into slavery rather than killing him and rather than leaving him in the pit. Now they say, well, okay, we'll just make some money off of him, and they sell him for 20 shekels of silver. Do you know how much 20 shekels of silver was? Well, it was a sizable amount of money, if you want to call it that. It was worth about 2 years of wages. But remember, 2 years of wages is going to be divided up among 11 brothers. Would you sell your own family member for 2 years of wages divided 11 times? I mean, even Judas betrayed the Son of God, the Messiah, for 30 shekels of silver. You're going to sell your own brother for 20, divided up 11 ways? And selling him into slavery was not a gift. In fact, in some ways, selling him into slavery was worse than death, because these slaves in the ancient Near East, they were treated terribly. They were tortured. They were sold to forgive other debts that the owners might have. Slavery was a worse option than dying there on the spot. And what I think is possibly the most tragic, after the brothers carry out their deceitful plan, and after they come back to their father Jacob with Joseph's robe that they've soaked in blood, look how they refer to their own brother in verse 32. They hand the robe to their aging father Jacob, and they say, "Examine to see whether it is your son's robe." Do you see something heartless there? They don't even refer to Joseph by his name. He's no longer even their brother, but now he is just Jacob's son. They have zero emotional connection. They do not care. Their hearts are about as hard as they could possibly be, even after they have done this terrible, horrible thing. But even with all of those lessons from Genesis 37, there's two things that I want to point out from this chapter today that carry over into your life and mine. The first is that our past often returns to haunt us. What happens to Joseph is kind of exactly what Jacob did as the father earlier in his life. You know, showing favoritism was not absent from Jacob's story. It happens when he's a young adult and he's pursuing a woman to marry. He favors Rachel over Leah, and that causes all kinds of problems, not only in his life, but in Rachel's life and in Leah's life. But even going further back from when Jacob is a young adult on his own, do you remember Jacob's life growing up in his house? Jacob has a twin brother named Esau. Jacob is the favorite of Rebekah, his mother. Esau is the favorite of Isaac, his father. And when it comes time to pass on the blessing, the birthright, you remember the story. Rebekah convinces Jacob to trick her husband Isaac and his father Isaac while Esau is out in the fields hunting. And Jacob suffers many years because of favoritism. You would think that when Jacob was the father and when he was in charge, he would have known better. He would not have allowed favoritism to define his household. But he did anyway. And his past returned to haunt him. It's very ironic if you go back 10 chapters in the book of Genesis to Genesis 27, when the writer is telling the story of how Rebekah and Jacob tricked Isaac. It says that Rebekah took the best clothes of Esau, her older son, which she had in the house, and put them on her younger son Jacob. She also covered his hands and the smooth part of his neck with goat skins. They use goats to trick Isaac. Well, 10 chapters later, when Jacob is being tricked by his sons, Moses tells us in the account of this story that the brothers, they dip Joseph's robe in the blood of goats. Isn't that interesting? Goat skins is used to trick Isaac. The blood of goats is used to trick Jacob. The irony is rich, but the truth is even richer. Our past often returns to haunt us. More on that in a second. But the second big lesson from this chapter is that a missed opportunity for good is no better than a managed operation for evil. You might remember that Reuben, the oldest brother, he wants to put a stop to the murder. He doesn't want to see Joseph killed. And so Reuben comes up with the idea, well, let's just throw him into the pit. Now, we get to read from the outside, and we know as the reader that the reason Reuben wants to throw Joseph into the pit is because Reuben's going to circle back later on and rescue his brother. But by the time he comes back, it's too late. And Joseph has already been sold into slavery and carted off a long way from home. Reuben had the right intention, but he still missed the opportunity. And a missed opportunity for good is no better than a managed operation for evil. Stopping the murder and failing to do the right thing was no better than going ahead and committing the murder to begin with. What Reuben did was not enough. Now, Reuben will eventually reconnect with Joseph some 20 years later. But Reuben doesn't know that on that day. For all he knows, his opportunity was gone. Now, you might look at this and say, well, yeah, but this was all God's providential plan. And sure enough, it was. If Joseph had never been thrown into the pit, Joseph would have never been sold into slavery. If Joseph had never been sold into slavery, he would have never made it to Potiphar's house in Egypt. If he had never made it to Egypt, he would have never become the second most powerful man in Egypt. And if he had never become the second most powerful man in Egypt, he would have never been able to have food for his starving family during the famine. And yeah, you trace God's blessing all throughout the story. But that's not the point. We still have to realize these two very important truths about our lives. Number one, our past will often return to haunt us. And number two, a missed opportunity for good is no better than a managed opportunity for evil. I want to spend a little bit more time on that first lesson. That our past often returns to haunt us. Have you ever seen the movie The Patriot with Mel Gibson? It was filmed in 2000. Tells the story of the American Revolution. It's a wonderful movie. In fact, it's very historically accurate. Mel Gibson's name in the movie is Benjamin Martin. Benjamin Martin was a real character in the American Revolution. His nickname was the Swamp Fox. And sure enough, he was the man who kind of commanded the militia to help defeat the British by keeping them in the South long enough for the French to come over and help aid the soldiers in the North. But at the beginning of the movie, the viewer has to be watching very carefully because Benjamin Martin's voice makes a statement that really sets up the plot for the rest of the movie. In the beginning of the movie, Benjamin Martin narrates, and the music is playing in the background, and he says, "I have long feared that my past sins will return to haunt me, and the cost will be more than I can bear." Well, the movie continues through the plot, and Benjamin Martin's oldest son, Gabriel, eventually joins the Continental Army against his father's wishes. And then toward the end of the movie, later on in the war, Benjamin and Gabriel, father and son, they command the militia together. Benjamin Martin was famous among the colonies for his great heroic feats during the French and Indian War. And his children would always notice that whenever Benjamin Martin would come into town or go to a pub, people would buy him drinks or reward him or honor him for his great bravery in that war. And they would ask Benjamin Martin time and time again, "Father, what happened at Fort Wilderness?" They always talk about what happened at the Battle of Fort Wilderness, and he would never tell them. But toward the end of the movie, he finally breaks down and he tells Gabriel, his oldest son, what happened at Fort Wilderness, because he feels like Gabriel has become a man. He's fought the war, and so he deserves to know. And he tells Gabriel how after winning a battle, he committed a terrible, grievous sin according to the rules of war, and rather than leaving the dead bodies untouched, they cut up the bodies and sent them down the river to the Indians, showing them what they had done. Well, at the end of the movie, Gabriel's wife and father-in-law are killed in a fire. Colonel Tabington and the Redcoats, the cavalry, they're responsible for that death. Gabriel takes off on his own to go and kill Colonel Tabington in great anger. Gabriel gets off a shot and hits Colonel Tabington in the chest, and he falls to the ground. And Gabriel, thinking that Colonel Tabington has died, pulls out his knife and he is going to cut up Colonel Tabington into many different pieces, just like his father had done with the French at Fort Wilderness. And as soon as he begins to dismember the body of Colonel Tabington, Colonel Tabington, who is actually still alive, rolls over and shoves his spear right into the stomach and chest of Gabriel, who then dies. Benjamin Martin catches up and he finds his dead son with Colonel Tabington and his soldiers long having exited the scene. And the viewer of the movie realizes what Benjamin Martin meant at the beginning of the movie when he said, "I've long feared that the sins of my past will return to haunt me, and the cost will be more than I can bear." If Benjamin Martin had never committed that sin, there would not have been a story to tell his children, but because he told Gabriel what he had done, it ended up costing Gabriel his life and Benjamin Martin a child. Now that is an extreme example of a spiritual truth that the things we do wrong right now one day will catch up to us and they will haunt us and we will suffer the consequences. You know, I work with young adults and I have so many parents of young adults in their 20s and early 30s ask me to go talk to their children about coming to church because their children have left the church. And unfortunately, many times their children aren't interested. And the reason why is because their children, when they were teenagers, heard the parents so often talk about how much they disliked going to church. And so when their teenagers became adults making their own decisions, they decided not to go. And their parents wonder, well, why are my children no longer faithful in attending a local church? It might be because of the sins of your past that are returning to haunt you. Or if you don't model for your children what a loving marriage looks like, if you don't model for your children how a husband should treat his wife or how a wife should treat her husband, they may grow up with marriages that are also broken, in homes that are suffering from so much chaos. You know, life has a funny way of coming back to bite us if we don't do it correctly the first time. And with that same thinking, we can't ever forget that a missed opportunity for good is no better than a managed opportunity for evil. You know, if you hear people gossiping about someone in the church, you may not be the one doing the gossip, but if you don't speak up to stop the gossip, what good have you really done? You know, as the church, if we tell people to vote for Christian morals and Christian ideals, but we don't have any involvement in speaking out against abortion or racial inequality or whatever it might be, what good have we really done? A simple vote at the ballot box made in secret and silence, that doesn't change the world. You may have a lot of friends or family members that you know who aren't Christians. Even if you're a good neighbor, or if you're a faithful confidant, if you don't help them find the redeeming love of Jesus, if you don't explain to them how to be saved, if you don't lead them to the waters of baptism, what good have you really done? In some instances, you're just like Reuben, who delayed their death now, hoping that one day you could return to pull them to safety. But you know you aren't guaranteed that you're going to get that chance. If you can do good today, do it. Don't kick the can down the road. Because the missed opportunity for good is no better than a managed opportunity for evil. God's sovereignty never exonerates our responsibility. And our responsibility is never just for a moment, but for a lifetime. Make the right choices today so you won't have to apologize tomorrow. I am so glad that you are joining us for this series. I hope that this first study of Genesis chapter 37 has blessed your life in one way or another. I invite you to come back with us next week as we continue our study of the life of Joseph. God bless and take good care.